Welcome to the Blue Oasis Podcast. This is the podcast for finding peace and prosperity, learning the history of hobbies, as well as developing a little side hustle. If you want to find peace and prosperity in your life, this is your show. Get ready. You're listening to the Blue Oasis Podcast. I am your host, Adam Rothstein. All right, let's get to the show. All right, and welcome back to the Blue Oasis Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Rothstein. With me is Christopher Pellegrini. How are you?
Good. How you doing? Thank you, Adam.
I'm just glad I got that right. Out of all the things,
it gets misspelled a lot as Pellegrino because people know the sparkling water. So if you remember that, you're about 80% of the way there on the pronunciation.
And all I had to worry about was a Steen and a Stein when they misspoke. Okay. So tell me how you got into the alcohol business.
Okay. So we'll go way back in my journey with beverage alcohol. This takes me back to when I was a teenager, actually. And I was studying about Prohibition, and I found out about bathtub gin and moonshine, that sort of thing. So I was like, oh, people were making their own alcohol. I wonder how you do that. So I looked it up, figured out that it was not that challenging. At least to make alcohol, to make ethanol is not that hard. To make something palatable is a bit more challenging, of course. But then one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I was secretly making my own homebrew as a teenager in my bedroom closet. And my parents weren't very happy with that. So I had to give up on that after a while once they finally figured out what was going on. But that turned into a pseudo apprenticeship at a local microbrewery in Vermont, and when I was still a teenager. And fast forward, I end up in Japan many years later, and that intense interest in handmade small batch alcohol had stayed with me. And when I came over here, it was just, there was so much quality everywhere in the sake industry. And as I would soon find out, but I had never heard of before, the shochu and awamori industries.
What is that? The shoin on it? I can't even pronounce
it. Shochu and awamori are Japan's two indigenous spirits. So it was a little bit of a jump for me from craft beer to craft spirits. But I think once you get to know these drinks a little bit better, you find out that these are like the craft beer of spirits almost. They're made from so many different base ingredients. There's so much history behind it, and so much of it is about the people, the place, and the process. And it's a really, really beautiful thing. It's a huge thing. It's a huge part of the Japanese economy that's just hiding in plain sight. Most people in the US and other parts of the world have never heard of shochu before, or they think that they've heard of shochu, but what they've actually heard of is soju, which is a Korean spirit, which really, other than the fact that they both start with an S and rhyme, have very little in common when it comes down to it. But they get conflated all the time. It can be quite confusing. But these spirits, shochu and awamori, have been around for 5-6 centuries. They are not a fad. They're not a trend. They are part and parcel of Japanese cuisine, and they are everywhere. I mean, it's just a part of the day in and day out. And it is amazing to me that they haven't been discovered yet overseas. If you want some context, there is more shochu and awamori produced in Japan every year than tequila in Mexico.
That is amazing.
It is. It's crazy.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
And yet, what percent? According to what I was able to dig up, about 66% of tequila is exported. It leaves Mexico. A lot of it going north into the United States and up into Canada as well. 66%, far less than 1% of shochu and awamori output every year leaves Japan. So it's this behemoth. It's the elephant in the room, really. It's the last big secret that Japan really has up its sleeve. And I just ran face first into it, and I had no idea what it was going to be like. I wasn't expecting it, but it was my intense interest in these small, these family-made drinks, small company drinks, and I was smitten. And I haven't turned back. I just, been going for it ever since.
That's definitely what I've been doing with this. Just going for it. Just keep pursuing the passion. What was the first thing you noticed about Japan, like their culture compared to the difference of the United States when you moved?
That's a really interesting question, Adam. The reason why it's interesting for me is because before I moved to Japan, I lived in South Korea for a couple of years. And before that, I lived in Spain. And the two countries that I had lived in before moving to Japan were so radically different from each other that when I finally arrived in Japan, my third turn of being a full-time foreigner, in how many years? Within the span of about 4 or 5 years, it didn't throw me for as big of a loop as it might have, I think is what I'm going to say. So when I ran up against things that might have caused culture shock, especially the superficial stuff, the things that you can see on the surface, it didn't really throw me. I was like, okay, that's different. I don't understand why it's that way. There's nothing I can do about it. If I happen to feel uncomfortable about it or I don't like it so much, there's nothing I can do. So I'm going to adjust my expectations. I'm going to adapt, and I'm going to accept what I can. And so the stuff that really struck me as different was much deeper. It wasn't the food that people eat or the clothes that they wear. It was more about human relationships and expectations. And so one thing that I had noticed, and is a big thing in South Korean culture and Korean culture writ large, is the respect that is automatically afforded to people who are senior to you. And that often just is as simple as having an earlier birth date than you. And it's just a part of the culture that governs many, many, many interactions. And when I came over here, I noticed something similar. I was like, oh boy, here we go. Here we go again. I know what this is, but I also know that I'm not easily going to be able to get used to it. So I'm going to just have to bite my tongue for a while on this whole the junior senior relationships. And to this day, and I've been here for 20 years now, that's one thing that still kind of is hard for me. In that sense, it still causes a bit of culture shock, whereas pretty much anything else is just part of the way that I live my life now. But the one thing where I don't really like it, and that's part of it. I've learned to expect it and deal with it and accept it, but I don't necessarily respect it all the time. But that's just part of life when you are living in a new environment, in a new culture.
There are definitely some things that throw you for a loop. I think just moving a lot, I think when you do that, like even if it's like just across town, I mean, it's a little bit of a difference there because, there's that one shop there that you went to for so long, but then you move a little bit down and and it's like, oh, now I have to go 15 miles the other way, sort of thing. But,
yeah.
But there is that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Now you've been licensed before you were 20, before you were 21 to actually make your own craft, but you couldn't taste it.
That's right. Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I was licensed. I would say that I was employed. What ended up happening was when I was working at the brewery in Vermont, I was so interested in all aspects of the game of building a business out of something that was so cool. And that actually the owner at that time Lawrence Miller, this is Otter Creek Brewery in Middlebury, Vermont. He had built this business out of his hobby, his home brewing hobby. And I had a home brewing hobby that my parents squashed because I was underage and it was probably illegal. So I kind of get where they were coming from. But I kind of had visions of doing something similar. I really loved how excited people got about something that I had created. I mean, it's kind of like being a chef, I suppose. You love it because of the process, and you love it because I believe people are sustained by the reactions that their customers have to their food. And I was really interested in seeing how this was done on a more professional level. And so I went to Lawrence and I said, hey, give me a job. And we created this sort of like loose apprenticeship where I was learning all aspects of the business, and I was in packaging, and I was shadowing the cellar master. And then I was working with the engineers to keeping the boil running, and then the labeling and blah, blah, blah. And then one day, one week, I should say, in the same calendar week, we had a bit of a crisis. Our first brewer wrecked his back and was out of commission for a couple of months. And then in the same week, and this was a complete coincidence, our second brewer left the state to join the circus. So that's not a joke. I am telling the honest truth. And so the president of the country, Mr. Miller, came in and said, does anybody in this place know how to make beer? Other than him, of course. But he was not really interested in putting the long boots on again and standing up on the brewing platform. And, little teenage me was like, huh? And it was determined that it was legal so long as I didn't drink anything that I was making. And so I became the youngest commercial brewer in the United States. And it was just, I was in the right place at the right time. It had nothing to do with my skill set. It just happened to be that I had made beer. I had read homebrewing books by Charlie Papazian. I knew the basic science behind it. And I had already been following the two brewing guys around up on the platform. I was like a damn puppy dog. They couldn't get me to leave them alone. I was just like, well, why do you do it like this? And how long do you keep it at that temperature? And what if it goes higher than that temperature? And like, oh, kid, come on. And then soon I was filling in for them. And then I fortunately didn't have to go back to stacking boxes on pallets after that, because I had quickly become a little bit too useful. It was, so that's, I wasn't, to go back to your question, I wasn't licensed. I was more just in the right place at the right time. And I was employed to do it. That's for sure. But it was a lot of fun. And of course, I mean, I think it was a little more based on what you said to me just now than just being at the right place at the right time. You still took your time, your free time, to learn how to make alcohol. And as a teenager, like growing up in the Mid-Atlantic, like that, even that was frowned upon. Like they would have thought you were out of your mind. Like, no, you're supposed to be in school. You're supposed to be learning about history, science, and if you want to make money, mow the lawn, or work at Subway or something. Not right. Make alcohol in your bedroom. Yep. No, that's definitely true. And when my parents found out that I had been brewing, they couldn't conceive of it. That was part of the reason I was able to fly under the radar for so long. They just A, didn't know how beer was made. B, couldn't fathom that their son would be making it in his bedroom. And but then one day I was brewing in the kitchen at the wrong time. My father came home unexpected, and that was the end of that. So, oh well. But it all worked out. I mean, it turned into a job, which turned into stronger passions. And then that stayed with me when I came over here. And now I'm doing something it's still beverage alcohol related, but it's a very different angle. But still, paying the utmost respect to the craft and trying to help them spread the word.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't the end of the world for you. It was just like it was more of a learning opportunity.
Yeah, right.
So to speak. But Yeah. I mean, yeah, you did get grounded for a bit, did you, or anything?
I did lose a fair number of privileges for a little while. Yes.
Oh, I
Well, my parents were, see, my father at the time, can't remember which school he was at. He was like the superintendent of some school district, maybe. And then my mother was the deacon in the Episcopal Church. So they were two reasonably well-known folks in our very small community. And that was my making illicit alcohol in the house was probably not going to be great for their local reputation. So that was the end of that.
Well, it probably all did work out for the best.
I think it did. Yep.
Is there a different process between making wine? Have you ever made wine or beer or just straight whiskey, or how, like, you've made them all?
Well, I haven't. I mean, I've certainly been to all of the breweries and distilleries associated with what you have just described. In terms of, if I may be so bold as to rope Japan into this, Japan's most famous drink is called sake, and it's actually called nihonshu, but everybody internationally calls it sake, which incidentally in Japanese just means alcohol. So, but whatever, it doesn't matter. If you say sake, people know what you're talking about. Sake is often labeled as a rice wine, but it's not really a wine at all. Wine is made from grapes, and then also some other fruit can be made into things that people call wine. But sake is more like a beer, actually. And beer and sake require a conversion of starches into sugar before you can ferment and make alcohol. Grapes are easy. Grapes are wonderful because they're little sugar balls, and all you need is yeast to do the conversion to create alcohol. With rice and other grains, and for beer and whiskey, we're talking about barley most of the time. Barley has complex bundles of sugars that are starch chains, and yeast can't convert those into alcohol. There's a step that has to happen first. It's the saccharification of those starches, the conversion of those starches from starch into simple sugars, namely glucose. And so in the beer and whiskey world, you're talking about malting. And malted grains are just the foundation of beer and whiskey. And malting is it's a rather it's reasonably complex. It takes a lot of labor if you're going to actually malt. No, few breweries and distilleries malt their own grains these days, but you're basically tricking the grains, the barley grains, into converting all of their internal starches into sugar just before they think they're about to germinate, before they think they're about to become new barley plants. And then you stop that process by putting them in a kiln and basically cooking them. And it cuts the process short before the grains can reach their goal. And then you have little sugar. What are they? Like nuggets or something, little grains of sugar, just like a grape almost. But you needed that one extra step. With rice, which is also a grain, especially in this part of the world, there's no malting involved, but there's a different means to that end. And that happens to be something called koji, Koji. And koji is Japan's, and this is very sexy, it's Japan's national mold, MOLD, or MOULD, depending on which variety of English you subscribe to. And it is something that occurs naturally in the environment. And it's a mold that is central to pretty much everything fermented in Japan. So we're talking about miso, we're talking about soy sauce. Of course, it's sake, it's shochu, it's awamori, it's a bunch of other drinks that are made with koji. And koji is a microorganism that will grow on grains in the right environment, usually a humid environment. And those mold spores will create enzymes that basically do the same thing as malting. They cut the starch chains into simple sugars. And then you can brew with those grains of rice or grains of barley. You can use koji on barley too. So it's a bunch of different mechanisms, processes for getting to the same point. And that goal is to have an abundance of simple sugars that the yeast can go to town on. And then the yeast creates, and this is common for all types of alcohol, whether it's wine or whiskey or beer or sake or shochu or awamori. The yeast will create three things when it eats glucose. It will create heat, and a lot of it. It'll create carbon dioxide, and a lot of that too. It will also create alcohol, which is what we want. And yeast has us humans very well trained because it wants sugar. And all it has to do is excrete this weird ethanol stuff that we go gaga for. And then we give it more sugar. And so then it's a good symbiotic relationship. Yeast really have us under their thumb.
There is one thing that just came up in my mind. Blueberry wine. Is there a difference between that and grape wine?
It's a very similar process. That is, as you can imagine, is not quite as common. But I know of some amazing, for instance, cherry wine that's made in Denmark, like unbelievable stuff that is available in some areas by a brewery called, or I guess it's a vineyard called Frederiksdal. They make some unbelievable natural cherry wine that is naturally fermented. There's no human intervention whatsoever. Just unbelievable stuff. So, of course, I think a lot of purists will say a blueberry wine, that's not a wine, or a cherry wine, is that really a wine? I don't really want to get into that argument with people, but the process of making it is not radically different. It's not really that different at all from making wine from grapes. So, people are going to get upset about it, but I take that back. Some people will get their knickers in a twist about it, but I don't think it's really that big of a deal.
The one thing that I will say, it's kind of like spread. It's kind of like jam or jelly. It is probably just, it's like blueberry jam, strawberry jam, raspberry jam. Like that. That's what I'm viewing it as. It's like, does it become a different thing just because of a different flavor? No, I don't think so. Wine is wine. Wine is
wine if it's made from fruit, I suppose. Yeah. And so the reason, just to get back to my point from before, and you raise an interesting point there as well, can there be a rice wine? And the reason why I said before that I don't think it can be called a wine, and I'm not saying that you are either. I think you're focusing on fruit. But sake is not a rice wine because you need that extra step. And, rice is not a grain, and rice is not a fruit. I don't think you'd ever mistake it for a fruit. But it's, again, while I agree with you, there's beer made from so many different ingredients. There's shochu is made from so many different ingredients. It's all called shochu. I think wine probably, and at the risk of angering some big time wine lovers out there. Yeah. If it's made from fruit, then hey, you're going to have an uphill climb on explaining why that doesn't qualify as a wine.
Yeah. Oh man, definitely. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Korea. The cities there are not that big. I have to ask you about that. Like differences in population, or how they go about their day-to-day tasks. It's not hustle and bustle. Is it hustle and bustle compared to like New York?
I think it is actually. Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, their biggest in South Korea, Seoul is pretty damn big. I don't know the exact population, but I think I would not be surprised if it's over 8 million people. So it's a decent number of folks. Not as big as Tokyo, but When I lived in Korea, I lived in what was a relatively small city and now has become what's known as Changwon. And I think that has close to 1 million. And that's kind of on like not such a very impressively sized city. So it's a reasonably well-packed geographical region, that's for sure. Not to the extent that Japan is, I would say. Japan is very, very, a lot of the country just is straight up inhospitable because it's so mountainous. So you got all these people crammed into certain population centers. And Tokyo is the one where I live. And the entire metropolitan area is well over 20 million people. So it's a force to be reckoned with, I think is a way to put it mildly. In Korea, Korea was really, and I love it. And I go back a couple of times every year. It's an absolutely beautiful place. The food is amazing. The people are great. And it's really interesting. Culturally, there's so many differences between Japan and Korea, but I think it's safer to say that Korean culture is a little bit closer to the side of the spectrum that Japan is on than you would say many European cultures are, for instance. So there's definitely that spectrum that you could place these different cultures on. And then also things come into play like the way that people accept information, the expectations about surrounding communication, relationships between the speaker and the listener, all sorts of things. Korea is certainly much more on the Japanese side of the spectrum than America is, for instance. Having said that, I remember somebody saying to me, and I thought this was hilarious because I'm of Italian heritage myself. When I first moved to Korea, somebody said to me that Koreans are the Italians of Asia. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, how so? And they said, well, everything's about food. And they can be, they can be incredibly inviting and warm and huggy and everything sometimes. And they can also be, there's an animated nature to communication there that I do remember, like my grandparents and my grandparents talking with their hands all the time. And I don't know how accurate that comparison is when you put everything into perspective, but I do remember it being kind of helpful for me when I first started living there in terms of how I understood the interactions, which for me, at least now that I've spent more than half of my life being a full-time foreigner in various cultures, I realized that the communication is so important, just in terms of your overall success, your path to success, your ability to do anything that you really want to do, and your autonomy, your ability to live your life in the way that you want.
And yeah, that's, 100%. Is there anything that, like, do you prefer living in the city or actually just living in like the suburbs, or like some rural area? Because I can tell you one thing is that, like, I grew up in the small town vibe, even though I was like, lived 20 minutes away from DC growing up.
Oh, okay.
So it was just very interesting and there, but like, I can tell you like you can tell the difference right away from where I lived and then the heart of DC. It's very weird though. You can tell the difference there. But what have you loved living in the most? A rural area, suburb, city?
That's interesting. I'm from a tiny town originally, Bristol, Vermont, population 2,200 on a good day, I think. And I'm from the mountains, from the hills in the middle of Vermont, and then I ended up in Seville, Spain, and then Masan, or what's now Changwon, South Korea, and now Tokyo, Japan. So I've just kept going bigger and bigger and bigger. And I never really expected myself enjoying the big city life as much as I do, but I do enjoy it. And one thing I really like about Tokyo is the anonymity of it. I really do enjoy people not really treating me like I'm different, which you certainly get in places that are smaller and where people just naturally interact more. Japan's fine, but Tokyo can be a little cold, can be a little New York. Folks are just they got their blinders on. They're just living their lives. They're like, just don't bother me. And that can be unwelcoming to a certain extent. And it can wear on you after a while. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I've lived next door to my neighbors in my apartment building. There's a flat on each side. I do not know them. I've lived next to them for years. The only time we talk or feel like we might need to talk to each other is when there's a big earthquake. And then all of a sudden everybody wants to be friends. So yeah, I do really like Tokyo, but that wears on me a little bit. So another really, really enjoyable part of the country for me is the island where, surprise, surprise, all the shochu is made, which is in Kyushu Island down in the southwest. And there's 7 prefectures there. And I think the largest city population wise, which is Fukuoka, might be 2 million people. It's not breathtakingly rammed, but there's more, love your neighbor, just like, let's help each other out. Let's be friendly to each other. People are more prepared to stop and have a chat. You do also get a lot more unwanted attention, especially if you go further south and on the island. And then you can't really have a coffee by yourself down there. You're going to get somebody coming over to talk to you half the time. But I guess what I prefer is some balance between the two. I don't want either of them full time, but I know that's really hard to ask for. I don't know how you engineer that, but overall, the end of that story is that I'm just happy here. I'm happy to be in this country. I'm happy. There's no perfect place on earth, obviously. And you take the good with the bad, and there's a whole lot more good here than there is bad. So I'm very, very blessed in that respect.
Speaking of coffee, I've heard of Irish coffee, and my mentor, Jason Stapleton, he will put like barley, not barley's, or it's not barley's or Bailey's. Why
Bailey's? Yeah, there you go.
Oh my, why did I say barley's?
Because I've been talking about barley
coffee and his new wife. Like just turns a blind eye to it too. Like that is who he is, and he has just done an incredible job with his nomad network, and there are good things about drinking alcohol, but in moderation, and some people can find it that even in the morning you can get stuff done with a little snork every now and then. You just gotta, this is the key. I mean, is just sipping slowly, and then don't overdo anything, and then if you're at liberty to do that and you don't have to be driving a car anywhere, then fantastic, more power to you. So I have my personal rules generally, unless I'm on vacation, is I try not to drink anything before 5:00 p.m., not a.m. And that's just me. And I am a very, very deliberate and slow paced sipper of everything, whether it's the craft beer that I love or shochu or awamori. And you just mentioned an Irish coffee. There's a drink that I really love. I think it's a great brunch drink, since we're talking about kind of morning sipping. There's a roasted barley shochu available in the US called Mugi Hokka. And it's really nice when you mix it about 1-to-1 or 50-50 with cold brew coffee over ice. And then you top it up with some sparkling water or club soda or whatever, and just mix it lightly. And it's a really nice kind of, it's a coffee drink, but it has, this super
deep roasted note thing going on, some good nuttiness. So that inspired. I might have to make one of those after this interview, actually, because that sounds really good right now.
Yeah. So we have to talk about baseball.
Okay.
because I mean, I think you and I are both big baseball fans. I have grown up an Orioles fan. Okay. And that was the first baseball team, first professional team I fell in love with, even though they were terrible. And Ripken was gone by the time I started rooting for them. Okay. So that it's just like, it's like you get to the party, no chocolate cake, apparently.
I know. Yeah, that's brutal. If you check my Instagram, you'll see that I met a very, very, very well-loved former Oriole, who I assume some of your listeners are also live in the same area of the East Coast that you do. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, they're mostly in Maryland. If they're anywhere, they're in Maryland now, and I'm in Florida. Okay. But I grew up in Maryland.
Did you really? Okay, because I met Eddie Murray at a bottle shop just last September.
You met Eddie Murray?
Yeah, I did. I did meet Eddie Murray. I was at the Remington Bottle in Baltimore, which is this great little bottle shop there. And Eddie was there. And so I quickly ran to the beer cooler and grabbed a 6-pack of Steady Eddie, which is the beer that's named after him, and got a picture with him. It's on my Instagram. I'm very pleased with that one. And I didn't get to talk to him that much. I maybe only got to talk to him for about 10 minutes, but he's an absolutely lovely guy. And,
is this the one? That's not Naha. Okay. No.
No, if you on my Instagram, it's probably, if you look at it, I think it's posted in rows of 3. 1, 2, 3. It's four rows down.
Okay, 4 rows down. There it is. And there's the Steady Eddie. Wow. And he's wearing an Under Armour shirt of all things Maryland. How about that? How about that?
So I'm from Vermont, so we don't have any real base. I take that back. We do have the Vermont Lake Monsters. That's about it. But
you have like A-ball at that.
I think it's short season A-ball. I think it's rookie A-ball. Yep. And the first amazing player that I saw play baseball in Vermont, playing minor league baseball, was Ken Griffey Jr., because he played for the Vermont Mariners before he went on to Seattle.
Oh, that is incredible. Wait, how old? I wasn't when he was on the Mariners. I wasn't born when him and his father played. So okay. You have. I was born in you have about 5 or 6. You have about maybe 7 years before I was born, actually, and that's quite telling. That should tell you a little bit about my age. So there's that. And then he went on and went to Cincinnati, and he could have, he definitely could have had a championship had he stayed and been on the team in 2001, because they had, they were like, Ichiro had just gotten there, and they won 116 games, which is like, who does that? And had he been there, I think they would have.
It could have pushed them over the edge. Yeah,
could have pushed them over the edge. The Yankees might not have even been in the World Series, but I think they would have, found a way to beat Arizona and some guy by the name of Luis Gonzalez would have not had the winning walk-off hit. Yeah. So some weird person that we don't know about. Have you been to games in Japan?
I am a huge. I'm a huge Tokyo Swallows fan, And I have been going to games at Meiji Jingu Stadium since late 2002. I average close to, actually, not anymore. Full disclosure, I've just, because my passion, my hobbies related to these drinks have turned into another career. So I used to go to about 40 home games a year. And I even have a podcast that is dedicated to that one baseball team, the Tokyo Swallows. It's called the Tokyo Swallows podcast, and it comes out like once a month if we're lucky. It's me and a couple of other friends who are also fans of the team, and we just shoot the poop related to the Swallows. And last year, they won the title for the first time in my 20 years here. And I still don't truly believe that it actually happened, because we've been through so much mediocrity over the years. But they just were, it was kind of a perfect storm, right place, right time. And they just put it together, and down the home stretch. September and October were beautiful. November was even better. So, beautiful, beautiful thing, beautiful game, beautiful team. Hopefully they don't slide back down into the cellar again this year.
Bryce Harper was going to go to the Tokyo. Okay, it's not the Tokyo Monsters, or oh my God, you just said it, and it's like I can't.
There's two teams in Tokyo. There's the Giants, who are the Yankees on steroids, because there's no freaking salary cap. And then the Mets are the Tokyo Swallows, which is my team. So, and they're kind of they're the lesser team. People always overlook them, but historically they are one of the, I don't want to overstate this, but I would put them in the top half of like historical success for a franchise in the country. So it's not nothing. They hadn't won a championship in 20 years. So the previous one was 2001, just before I arrived. And then their most recent one was 2021. So it was a long time coming.
Yeah. I mean, like I've seen the stadiums in Japan. It is more rowdier than like a college football stadium or like Friday night.
Organized football. Rowdiness, right? Yeah. It's really interesting.
Like you don't even
sing chants and stuff.
Oh, sorry. You don't even see stadiums that big. Like it has to seat 75,000 people. Like some of those stadiums. It depends on the stadium. Like Jingu Stadium's the second oldest baseball stadium in a professional baseball stadium in Japan. It's old enough to have hosted Babe Ruth at one point. And so it's pretty modest. It's like 32,000 people capacity. There are much bigger stadiums, but the rowdiness at games tends to come from the unreserved seats in the outfield, where there's a lot of singing and chanting, and there's a small band that plays the cheer songs for each of the players as they're at the plate. And it's interesting because there is this organization to it. There's a lot of energy and a lot of noise, but it's only when your team is on offense. And then you sit down and the other side does their cheer songs. So it's back and forth. You take a half inning break, and then they take a half inning break, and then it's back and forth nine plus times. So it's interesting. And our team has this silly dance, the umbrella dance, that when we score a run, everybody whips out an umbrella, and then there's this song that everybody sings together as this whole gigantic sea of umbrellas is just like bobbing up and down around the stadium. It's pretty wild to watch, and yeah, it's pretty cool. When friends come to visit and they're like, "I want to go to a game. Let's get some good seats." I'm like, "No, we're not going to get good seats. We're going to get crap seats, because those are way more fun." And so you sit in the outfield unreserved and join in all the cheering and chanting, and buy draft beer from a keg off of somebody's back who's lugging it up and down the stairs, and have some fun. Nice. Oh man, it's 8:17. I actually was not expecting to go so long as I did. Anything else you want to talk about?
I know that this podcast is all about hobbies. And so maybe I can just clean it up here at the end with essentially what I'm doing right now is I have established an import company in the US to bring Japanese indigenous spirits to the American market. And the name of the company is Honkaku Spirits. And that was basically the fruition of a pretty long journey here in Japan, where I was just doing everything that I could in my free time to spread the word about these drinks. And then during the pandemic, it was March of 2020, and I quit my full-time job. And I said, screw it, I'm doing this myself. And we founded that company in New York and haven't looked back. Just reached our second anniversary. We're still kicking. And basically I'm basically doing my hobby full time. And my hobby was being proselytizing for these drinks that nobody had ever heard of. And so, a couple morals to this story. Number one, make sure you have alternate access to health insurance. Number two is basically I figured out that I was why did it take me so long to start this company? I was waiting so long to give myself permission. I was looking for other people to give me permission. And I just finally figured out, I don't know when I'm going to be more ready. And you just kind of have to go for it. Now, I picked a pretty incredible time to start a business. March 2020 was wild timing. But I'm not sure if I would take it back. I'm not sure I would do it differently. It forced me to think about things in a whole bunch of ways that I didn't expect to have to think about them. I had to change the business model a couple of times. We had to be way more creative. We got delayed at every turn. We burnt through a lot of our resources that we thought we weren't going to need for as long as we really needed them. And it was tough, and it still is today. But, if you're one thing that a lot of people need to just ask themselves is what am I waiting for? Am I waiting for myself to get out of my own way? And I think a lot of people are. And that certainly was the case for me. And once I just decided, well, there's nothing that's going to make me happier than doing this right now. And I will regret it if I don't. And yes, I do have health insurance, even if I quit my job. So we're covered there. And so I just went for it. And I think that's sometimes that's all. It just takes getting out of your own way. Give yourself the permission. Give yourself a shot at it.
Okay, now you get the gears rolling. As soon as I thought, okay, we're done here. In early of 2020, I told myself I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a short book, and I'd already basically written a novel as well. And I finished this book called Growing the Game, baseball's history, how to grow baseball. About that. And I was going to a writer's club. We were meeting at Panera Bread every weekend. Then that hits. Then we were on Zoom. And eventually I do get that finished, put it on Barnes and Noble, and didn't go well, but you do have to put yourself out there too, as well. I mean, and then I decided, you know what? I want to narrate this. I didn't do a good job narrating it. It was terrible the first time. If you listen to it on Audible, it's going to be crap. I'm probably going to have to update it, but that writing has led me to produce several audiobooks and just do all this audio content as well, whether it's this podcast or even some stories I sold on my own website too. I mean, like I'm just there. And aside from alcohol, I can take this anywhere. I can take this Mac, this microphone, and just go and record in any closet or studio and just read off my things. It is and I've like sold like about 6 audiobooks, or probably more, because if you count the picture audiobooks, but it's like, but I'm just so into it as well, because the first foot is the longest stride. You have to take the chance, and I took it, and I've got a side income, and I've had people wanting me to narrate some stuff for them, and I made some money with PayPal invoices. So there's that. Okay, and now I'll ask you again just to make sure are we good?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the moral of both of our stories is just to go for it.
Yeah.
That's
all right.
basically what it comes down to.
Okay. All right. I guess that'll do it for the Blue Oasis podcast. This is going to be episode 65. All right. So until the next one, stay safe, stay great. I'll talk to you all then.